Dr. Duyan, thank you so much for joining us today. I'd like to hear a little bit more about your story of immigration. I know that you came to the United States when you were 6.
Yes. So technically, I was actually born in the States. My mother came over here to make sure to guarantee me citizenship and to manage some other family things. And immediately we went back to Haiti. So my early childhood education was in Haiti. My earliest experiences were in Haiti. And around 6 years old, it felt important to her for us to, at that point, immigrate to America. And it was interesting because although I'm a citizen by birth, I remember learning English and assimilating to this culture and feeling very different. And starting school, I recall just really struggling integrating with others. I remember there was a lot of discussion about whether I properly could speak English at all. They had put me in remedial classes, in ESOL classes at that time. And my mother really had to fight to get me out of those classes and insisted that I was able to take on the language. And in these experiences, there was a lot of conversation about who I was as an immigrant, like a lot of emphasis that I was Haitian, that I was different from the other students, that we had a different country of origin, and that I was not American. But over time, really, I observed what it looked like for my other fellow Caribbean Americans or fellow Caribbean folks at that time to really come into ourselves. Because unless I insisted on my ethnicity, no one saw it. No one felt like this was a part of me. I felt like I was almost absorbed into what is like Black America, into an African American identity. And over time, I came to realize that there was a place that both of them could exist for me, that my ethnicity being extremely important to me could exist, and myself as a racial being in the States, where race is really capital, right? So your race is how folks first integrate with you, like race and gender. And then ethnicity is something, unless your accent or your style of dress insist upon it, isn't something that folks are really asking about or mindful of. So over time, I was like, okay, I'm Haitian and I'm American. I have adopted this language. I have adopted this culture. There are preferences of food that I have that are really quite American. But then looking at the generation before me, that isn't quite there as much, right? There is this holding on to their ethnicity and their country of origin because their assimilation process was a lot more fragmented than mine sometimes, partly because of the ways that they were treated, or partly because of what it meant to be an immigrant at the time in which they immigrated versus myself in the early 90s.
You use this word assimilation. Can you break that down for us? What does that really mean?
So assimilation is, I guess, a subset of acculturation. Acculturation being the experience of coming into a culture. Assimilation, more specifically, is to take on the dominant culture. So it is to either primarily speak the language, it is to primarily engage with the foods, it is to take on what is the dominant culture and make it your own or have it be your own, almost to the extent that your culture of origin is not really primary anymore. And I think we see this often with cultures where you have a different language at home, English becoming the language at home, right? Or the foods you eat becoming the primary foods that you're eating. This is like a full assimilation, is adopting the dominant culture as yours.
So you said that for the generation before you, so I'm assuming this is your parents' generation, they had a harder time or they chose not to assimilate. Can you talk a little bit more about that? What do you think some of the struggles were or some of the choices that they made were?
I think particularly, I'll say for Haitians, I recall my mother coming to the States at a much older age than me. So I came at 6, she came in her 20s or so. And at that time, there was a lot of negative impressions of Haitians in particular. So there was a lot of discussion about who Haitians were. There was an entire series where Haitians were like blamed for the HIV and AIDS epidemic in the States. Like it felt like a real rejection to be here, but it also felt that the issues that were occurring in Haiti were partly due to, be it France or America's meddling in Haiti in and of itself. So there was a lot of frustration with having to come here, but also with being here. And I think that led to a desire to hold on to what was truly theirs, which was their ethnicity and their culture. And for some of them, with the desire to go back home one day, and with others feeling like home would never be safe, but here would never truly feel like home either. And I think coming at a younger age, I had a slightly different experience. Sometimes I consider myself a second generation or 1.5 because of how young that I came. There wasn't as much of a stronghold into the culture of origin, right? Because at such a young age, I am just being seen as Black. I'm just being counted as Black. And then I'm being assumed to have all these other cultural understandings of what it is to be ethnically African American in the States, and feeling like I must learn that in order to assimilate adequately or to feel like I fit in with my peers. And I think when folks come at an older age, that pressure is less significant. And there also can be other illustrations of ethnic difference, such as accents and attire, that I lacked at that point because I had learned English at such a young age that I lack an accent.
That must have been so awful for your mom or whoever came to know, okay, this is the option that it is that they feel is best for their family, but they were being rejected, or there were stories that were told about who Haitians were. I wonder how people navigate that pain of not being accepted in a new place.
Mm. I have found that, particularly through my research, that pain resulted in a retreat into the culture, right? Retreat into particularly their culture, so in my case, Haitians, or Caribbeans at large, like finding other Black Caribbean immigrants and calling that home. And it's why you have these little enclaves in many major cities. So we have like Flatbush, we have different parts of Miami. We have places where Caribbean immigrants have found and created a home for themselves where they didn't feel like other. They could find the foods that were important to them. They can hear accents that were familiar. They can see practices that could be mirrored back to them. And I think that's what happens when there's a lot of rejection. One will reject in response, right? Okay, if you do not care for me, if you take issue with me, then I will take issue with you. And I will insist upon our separation and create a home elsewhere and create my own neighborhood. And if all goes well, maybe I don't have to leave that neighborhood at all. And for generations, we'll keep cultivating this one area for us. And I think that's one of the many responses folks have to feeling rejected in the country that they, for one reason or another, now need to call home.
You talk a lot about this idea of home. Where would you say home is for you? Was it the United States? Is it Haiti? What's your experience of those places now?
Say for myself, the United States feels like home for the most part because it is most familiar, but there is a warmth that feels like home when I go back to Haiti as well. And all the things that happen in my actual house, like within my family, that are then mirrored out to me in all of these other places. And sometimes I can find that with other Haitian Americans just in Miami, if we gather the things that are said and the ways that we behave, the mirroring back feels really profound. You're like, okay, this is home in one way. So, but I also know that I didn't spend most of my life in Haiti. So there are many ways in which it is not home. There are many customs that have changed, many, different ways that the language is not what I'm used to and therefore isn't home. And when I go there, I'm like, I really am American, aren't I? Like, this really isn't, this isn't my home anymore. But there is still a warmth that is felt when I see what has always felt like just my family reflected back in the culture at large.
What's so neat about your life is that these formative experiences have really informed who it is that you've become professionally. Tell us about your work with Face Race.
Yeah, so in thinking about what it means to be Black in America, what it means to be a Caribbean immigrant in America, I've really thought about the role of racism and xenophobia and oppression broadly, right? Because these are all the things that impact our identity. Like, who are we as people? Partly we believe it is just what we think is important, but part of it is a response to our environment. And in my work and in my personal experiences, I found that there's more than one siding of experiences of racism, xenophobia, oppression that occur that help us identify who we really are in the world, right? There's a response there. And it made it feel really important to me to address issues of racism at large in communities, in businesses, in schools, because it is impacting individuals' well-being so significantly. So right now I work as a diversity, equity, and inclusion consultant. I'm also a psychologist, so I pursue it from the lens of mental health and well-being, right? And relationship. We cannot go to work every day for 8+ hours a day, for many people more than 40 hours a week, and feel multiple experiences of racism, feel multiple experiences of invalidation, of othering, of silencing, because this erodes our sense of self. It creates further division. It creates a profound degree of disconnection. So even if at home we feel okay, if we continue to be eroded at work, where we unfortunately give a majority of our lives to our jobs, right? That erosion begins to impact our work product, and then we feel less successful at work. And then our employers begin to look at us as less essential to the business, right? And then we come home and that erosion seeps into our families. It seeps into our ability to make a nutritious and delightful meal, right? We're forgetting the salt. We forgot the seasoning. Dinner's getting on the table at 9 p.m. because we don't feel good. Like our day has depleted us and we have so little to give to our families. And then this cycle kind of continues where we become shells of ourselves because nowhere starts to feel safe and comfortable. And I have found that immigrants experience this at a really high level. People of color experience this at a really high level. Black people experience this at particularly a really high level. And then if you add on any other marginalized identities across gender, sexuality, ability level, religion, it just exacerbates and multiplies. So my personal origin story and my work as a psychologist really brought me here. And I feel it is imperative that workspaces become less racist, less xenophobic, less everything, in order for all of us to be healthier beings. Because it really, when you hear these stories, the amount of individuals who have seen their mental health decline as their jobs have had multiple instances of racism that they felt they had to be quiet about, it's really quite heartbreaking. And everyone walks away in a worse position than they were prior to. So that's really what's driving my work right now. And eventually that to me leading the therapy room and going into consulting full time.
Good for you. I really loved how you broke down the impact of these negative experiences in the workplace on the home life, because that's not something that we can just leave behind. It impacts our mind, it impacts our emotional life, our sense of well-being and sense of self-efficacy. Now, you use the word xenophobia. Can you just break that down for us?
Yeah, I feel like at the simplest definition would be like fear of other, right? Fear of foreigners, right? Fear of difference. And I think that's what a lot of this comes down to, right? Someone is different than me, and that scares me. And I'm sure there are many people who will hear this and say, I'm not scared. But you are, right? And that's what you're responding out of fear. Anger is, it's, what do we call it? It is a surface emotion. Beneath anger is actually often like sadness, fear, confusion. There's a lot of things under the anger that actually drives us. It is what causes us to see something different from ourselves and say it's wrong, that we dislike it, or that it's inherently flawed, or that it is incapable in some way. I've heard many clients, particularly with heavy accents, name the employers as seeing them less intelligent because of their accent, assuming that they don't speak English, even if they're from an English-speaking country that just happens to have an accent, meaning they don't have any other language that they access. Like English is their only language. And still there's this idea of, oh, you are less intelligent, you are less capable, something is wrong. Maybe clients won't understand you. I've heard that many times. They're like, oh, clients won't understand you because of your accent. But the client has never reported this. Like no one has ever reported that they cannot understand you. But still the employer is obsessed with this idea that your difference will be a problem until they make it a problem, until potentially you believe that you are a problem. And once you believe that you are inherently flawed, it is a quick cycle before you believe that there's nothing you can do right. And that will bleed into the remainder of your life. And it's really, really sad to see the amount of individuals who try to dampen their accents, try to sound more American, because this also isn't something that happens with British accents. Like no one is saying, I don't understand your British accent, right? It is these more marginalized countries' accents that get told something is wrong with you, and therefore I'm concerned about your success, until one believes that their difference will impact their ability to be successful.
You know, I was actually just presenting at a national conference, and I was told that I couldn't be understood because of my accent by someone who was in the audience. So this resonates deeply with me. And I imagine that it's a comment that many other individuals have heard. You yourself are saying that the clients that you've worked with have experienced this, and it really can impact you. It's easier to say, well, that doesn't really matter. What this person says doesn't count. But when you're in that space, it becomes really challenging. So I appreciate the work that you're doing to change the workplace culture, to educate people. I appreciate that your mother advocated for you, parents. This is something that's really important. Lots of times your children's abilities will be doubted just because they have an accent or they come from another place. And you really have to advocate for them to be placed at an appropriate level in school when they come to the United States. Thank you for sharing so much of your personal story with us and how it's informed your work today. We look forward to talking to you more about what you studied as a psychologist, and hearing some of the stories of the individuals that you worked with when you were doing your studies. Thank you.